Hello, this is going to be a short video on a response to a test that two of my 4 biology classes took on Friday. Their test results are going to be horrendous, and I think they're going to feel that when they get it, and I may actually let them redo it on Tuesday, so I'm hoping they catch this video before we get there. But what's going on basically in 5A and 5B is we talk about the equations for photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And here you can see we take CO2 and water and sunlight, CO2, water, and sunlight. We move it into a chloroplast of a leaf. We use some sunshine, and we actually make C6H12O6 glucose, and we make oxygen. Now, plants make sugar and oxygen for themselves, but our life, which are called heterotrophs, they're called autotrophs, or producers. They can make their own food. We are heterotrophs, consumers. We actually have to consume it. But the plants themselves make the energy, the sugar, and the oxygen for themselves. We just take it from them. We do it in a process called photosynthesis and cellular respiration, but what we use these for is to actually make a high energy molecule, biological molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and sunlight and the food energy sugar goes into it, and we take this inorganic phosphate and we bond it to this organic diphosphate, adenosine diphosphate, ADP, and we make ATP, like I said, an energy-rich molecule, which goes into cellular work and chemical synthesis to actually let the cells do things like endocytosis, exocytosis, also chemical synthesis in terms of making RNA and DNA, so we can go through the cellular work of actually dividing the cell through mitosis or even meiosis and actually make new cells. The chemical equation for photosynthesis is this, and here's the chemical equation for cellular respiration. You can see they're complementary, where the products of one become the reactants of the other, and the products of one become the reactants of the other. And the only thing that changes is sunlight goes in and ATP comes out. And that is the power of the sun. In Earth science, we talk about life cycles for the sun, and we start off with gaseous clouds, and we end up with our sun, we think, becoming a white dwarf. But we're located right about here, about 4.6, 4.7 billion years after the sun was born. So we think the sun's going to be around for quite a while, although you can see that it will change. There will be an end to this nice perfect process, but it's a long time coming. Okay, like I said before, cellular respiration takes in the sugar, takes in the oxygen. This is done by autotrophs and heterotrophs. It's done by the plants as well as animals and bacteria and fungus, and it actually takes the ATP, makes energy for the cells, producing carbon dioxide and water, which is going to go back into the plant so it can make more sugar and oxygen. The part of the plant that makes it is what's called a chloroplast. This is a sort of an artistic diagram of a chloroplast. I didn't put any real ones on here, although I did in my PowerPoint. But if you take a look at the chloroplast as well as the mitochondria, we have 2 cell membranes. And let me actually see if I can get a pen here. We have 2 cell membranes. We have the outer membrane, which is there, and we have the inner membrane, which is there. And the space in between this would be called the intermembrane. And this allows a semi-permeable double layer to control things in and out, and we can actually do things in the inner membrane that can be done inside and or outside. And then once we get inside, we get these big stacks of coins. I call them thin mints. Each individual thin mint is called a thylakoid. The outside part is called the thylakoid membrane, which you can see right there. Inside, the minty, chocolatey part would be called the lumen. And then we have them all stacked together in what's called granum or grana. And then they're all held together with, where is that on here? Lamella. So they're actually all held together, and we have black blobs in there called plastoglobules. We have red ribosomes. We have DNA. We have DNA down here for the ribosomes too, which is actually one thing that Lynn Margulis way back in the 1960s said that these may have been probiotics, prokaryotic cells that actually got endocytosed into because one produced sugar and oxygen really well, and the other one produced ATP. The way the actual process of the chloroplast works is I had my kids draw a line in between their diagram, and we separated what's called the light-dependent reaction, the part that needs sunshine, and the light-independent, or what used to be called the dark side, or the Kelvin cycle, which can run the light-dependent side pretty much runs in this section of time where the sun's up in the sky, and the light-independent can actually run from there all the way around because it does not need sunlight. So if you take a look at the sunlight comes in, hits the thylakoid, and this is where it's going to happen, is in the thylakoid where the chlorophyll actually is being held. It's going to hit the thylakoid, it's going to pull in water, sunlight, and it's also going to pull in ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and NADP+, and it's going to use those products with the input of sunlight to actually make ATP. And now this ATP is only utilized inside the chloroplast. It's not actually utilized for the cell itself, so it's utilized for the chloroplast to do the energy. And the NADPH, which is a high energy electron carrier, and it's going to use the energy from those two biological molecules to power the whole process of the Kelvin cycle. And then that's going to actually produce, well, the water is going to go in, it's going to get hydrolyzed, and this is the part that produces the oxygen. Carbon dioxide comes in along with the ATP and NADPH, and it's going to get changed into glucose, which is going to be the end product of the light independent. So light dependent side takes in water and sunlight and produces oxygen in the thylakoid membrane, and the light dependent takes in carbon dioxide as well as the ATP and NADPH and actually makes sugar, the glucose, C6H12O6, which is going to be utilized as energy for the plant and the animals. Okay, so now we've got the oxygen and we've got the sugar. Now we're going to take that oxygen and sugar through a process called cellular respiration, and we're going to use that for producing ATP. Now we start out here. This is the cytoplasm. Oh, and I didn't say this Kelvin cycle happens in the stroma, which I also didn't point out. That's sort of like the cytoplasm of the chloroplast, but it is in the stroma, and we'll get that down in a chart in a few minutes maybe. So out here in the cytoplasm is where we actually start the whole process. That's where we take the glucose molecule that we ingest, and or if the plant produces, it takes that and it actually changes it into 6-carbon sugar into 3-carbon pyruvates, which is going to be moved into the mitochondria for some ATP production, but we're going to start it out there. But if you look at the mitochondria, we got a double-sided section again. We have an intramembrane. We have cristae, which increase the surface area, which is going to allow this thing to do the electron transfer system of ATP production really quickly. And then we have other things. We got ribosomes inside. We've got DNA in there as well. But we have an intersection in between the outside membrane and the inside membrane, and it has its own DNA just like this one, so it can go through its own mitosis. Your plant cells can actually produce more chloroplasts if the sunlight goes up. Like if it's a plant underneath a tree and the tree dies or falls over, is cut down, and all of a sudden there's more sunlight, it can actually make new chloroplasts in each of the cells to benefit from that extra sunlight. And just like this, muscle cells can actually make more mitochondria. Don't have to wait for mitosis, they can do the mitosis all by themselves. Okay, and if we talk about cellular respiration, go down to this diagram right here. We start off with glycolysis. Glycolysis happens out, it's basically the lysis of glycogen or glucose. So we start out here and we take that 6-carbon sugar right there and we actually make 2 3-carbon sugar pyruvates, and it also produces 2 ATPs. It actually produces 4 ATPs, but it utilizes 2, so a net profit of 2 ATPs. That's the substrate level of phosphorylation. And then we actually move that pyruvate inside if we want to actually make larger numbers of ATP. So we get 2 ATP through this process. It also makes electron carrier, NADH, which is going to get moved over to this section. You can see there's more NADH coming out of the Krebs cycle, and FADH2, which is going to, again, electron carriers, which are going to go over this electron transport chain. But let's talk about the pyruvate moving over into the inside part, and that's the matrix, this jelly part of this mitochondria, and it's going to go through a process where it's going to take that pyruvate and change it through a whole bunch of different chemicals, and it's going to come out with additional 4 ATP. So this can happen whether we have anaerobic, which means no oxygen, or we have aerobic where we have oxygen. This process over here, this requires oxygen. So we need to have O2 to do this process, and this is why larger animals and plants can do this process, where bacteria and some of the fungus actually has to rely just on glucose or glycolysis, the breakdown of glucose, for their 2 ATP. We can get 4 with the presence of oxygen, and if you throw in these electron carriers over here to the electron transfer chain, we can get somewhere between 30 and 32 additional ATPs for a grand total of 38 ATPs. I'll put them down here, 38 ATPs through a process of using oxygen and glucose through a process called cellular respiration. Here's a table I had kids do, again, photosynthesis. This part is called photosynthesis right here. This part is called the Kelvin cycle. This is the light dependent side. This is the light independent side. This happens when the sun is up, and this happens 24 hours a day, although it happens more during the daylight, and we'll explain why here in a second. This happens in the thylakoid membrane, the actual membranes around these thylakoids in the grana, all over the chloroplast. It requires sunlight, it requires oxygen, or the water, it requires ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and NADPH, and what it's going to do is it's going to actually take that sunlight and turn it into ATP, but remember, it's only for the dark. It's going to go for this section down here, and it's going to change the NADP plus into NADPH, which is a high energy molecule, and both of these are going to go down, and they're going to power the light independent. This is why this section works better in the sunlight than it does at night, even though it can work at night, because it does not need sunlight, but it needs the ATP and the NADPH as its energy production. It also produces the water, hydrolyzes the water into oxygen. So this is the part of photosynthesis, the plant that actually produces the oxygen you guys are breathing. The light independent happens in the stroma, the cytoplasm part that looks sort of empty. This takes the ATP and the NADPH from the light dependent, and also pulls in the carbon dioxide when the plant actually pulls the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and this is the part that actually makes glucose. It also produces ADP and NADPH, which is going to go back up here and be recycled, so it should be in here too, but the big thing is this is the glucose production. So we got oxygen from the light dependent, and we get glucose from the light independent. Up here we actually have the process of cellular respiration, where we take the sugar, we take the oxygen, and I told my kids about stoichiometry. To actually get this 6-carbon sugar, we need 6 carbons, so we get 6 carbons out of this carbon dioxide. If you actually look at the number of hydrogens here, we get 12. We have 6 oxygens, we have 12 oxygens, we have all kinds of stuff in there, but this is stoichiometricalized, so that it actually balances the equation. Cellular respiration has 3 processes. Process 1, again, which can happen either aerobic or anaerobic. This happens in the cytosol of the cell, where we take glucose and we break it up into 2 pyruvates. We get 2 ATP net, and we make some NADH, so we can actually do the same sort of thing that we do for the electron carriers. In the Krebs cycle, if we have presence of oxygen in the mitochondria, in the matrix, we can take that pyruvate and we can actually change it into 4 ATPs, and this is where we actually produce the carbon dioxide that we exhale. And then we can actually take the electron information from the NADH and the NADH2, and we can actually move those things, or FADH2, we can move those things into the inner membrane, moving them right here, and through a process of protein pumps, we pump them in and out of this membrane, and we produce a boatload, up to 32 ATPs in a very efficient system. So add these all together. If you breathe, you can make 38 ATPs, up to 38 ATPs. And if you can't breathe or oxygen is a poison to you, you only get those 2. I put this in here just to show the intricacies, some of the intricacies for this process of cellular respiration, where we take glucose and we actually break it into a glucose 6-phosphate, fructose 6-phosphate, and then glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, and then 1,3-biphosphoglycerate, and then we can finally break it down to here for pyruvate. So you can see we use 2 ATPs to break this down. It actually produces 2 ATPs, so it knocks those 2 out, and then we get a net increase of 2 ATPs through this process. And then that moves the pyruvate into the matrix part of the mitochondria, and then we actually change this. It's also called the citric acid cycle. We do the Krebs cycle, and we actually pump that into, and we pump in the NAD+, and that comes out as NADH. Carbon dioxide comes out, NADH+, NADH, more carbon dioxide comes out, FAD, FADH+, and then we get all this stuff, plus we get 4 additional ATPs, and then we move all these things up, these high energy carriers, into this space, and we just go back and forth. You can see we go this way and that way and that way and this way and this way, and this is where we produce those 32 additional for a grand total of 38 ATPs. And then the last thing, humans breathe about 9.5 tons of air a year, but oxygen, O2, makes up only 24% of that air's mass. We extract a little over 1/3 every time you inhale a lungful of air. You exhale 2/3 of that oxygen back out. So this works out so that each person on Earth, 7 billion plus as of last year, needs about 740 kilograms of oxygen a year. And this is roughly the output of 7 to 8 adult trees. So if you look at a forest that looks like this, you start taking these trees out because this is what I need to breathe, and you take those trees out because that's what you need, and then you take those trees right there for somebody else. You can see that we probably need a whole bunch of trees. But believe it or not, most of the world's oxygen is actually produced in a marine environment, and most of that is actually produced 70 to 80% by algae living in the ocean. So you can see the individual pieces in here, that's producing 70 to 80% of the oxygen. So if we pollute the ocean, if we cut down the trees, we're actually maybe making to our own demise. In the last section, just talking about rebirth, we take sunlight. Sunlight actually gives the energy to the plant, where it produces oxygen and sugar for itself. Animals can benefit by actually eating plant material. They actually become adults, so they can lay more eggs on the tomato plants. This is called the tomato hornworm. This is the adult of the tomato hornworm, a very beautiful moth, a really funky looking. There's the horn that actually is called for the hornworm. Very funky looking caterpillar. But all life, whether you're a plant, an animal, a fungus, or bacteria, is eventually going to die, and it breaks down, and we'll put that material back into the environment so that the tomato plants, the plants can be happy, they can produce more animals, and it basically is the rebirth of life. So it's the energy to make life do what life does. All right, thank you, and I hope this makes more sense. 19 minutes, longer than I expected. Bye-bye.